And so now it is my pleasure to shift to our two presenters today, both of whom I've worked with very closely and who are leaders in their own respective rights. Marianne Mason is currently professor and co-director of the Earl Warren Institution for Law and Social Policy at the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. From 2000 to 2007, she served as the first woman dean of the graduate division at the UC Berkeley, with responsibility for nearly 10,000 students and more than 100 graduate programs. Her most recent book, and much of this bio statement you'll find in the program, so I won't go through all of it, but Marianne's most recent book, which she co-authored with her daughter, Eve Mason Ekman, is Mothers on the Fast Track: How a Generation Can Balance Family and Careers. And we're looking forward to hearing from Marianne now about her topic, Do Babies Matter? She'll give us the answer.
It's a great honor to be in this historic building, EU Parliament. I was just excited to see it, much less give a talk here, and to have, as I understand it, 30 European countries represented. Now, I usually give a talk to a university or an agency, so this is truly thrilling to see this great array. And to hear earlier the many, many different ways you're approaching the issue of gender equality. My talk is, as you heard, Do Babies Matter in Science? As you will see, this is based on research done in the United States from 2000 to the current time, and we use databases and data that is U.S. based, but I'm sure you'll recognize that these are very familiar questions and very familiar patterns. And we've also, today, are going to talk about the patterns and also what to do about them, since we've been very active in initiatives to provide family-friendly and keep women in the science pipeline. And I'm going to give you a hint because I don't want to keep you in suspense. Babies do matter. Okay. This project started in 2000 when I first became the graduate dean at Berkeley. And as Wanda mentioned, there's a whole tribe of graduate students at Berkeley. At that time, we gave out more doctorates than anyone else in the world. So you could really see graduate students at all phases of their careers, etc. And I was very excited because as an old-time feminist, I was way down there in the 10s when I got my PhD originally in history, and I got a law degree later, and it was still in the 10s and the 12s. This is a thrilling moment that more than 50% of the entering graduate students were women at Berkeley. My students weren't so excited because they were getting accustomed to it, but I was very excited. So this is the total population, and this is women in science. And again, I was very interested that your figures this morning from all over Europe look very similar to this. The biological sciences are now more than 50% women, but even in engineering, which had about 0 women in 1973. It now has gone up to 25%, and the physical sciences have made a lot of progress. So generally speaking, there's been a lot of effort, which you'll hear or have heard already, over many years now to get more women in the science pipeline, and it's succeeded. Women are going into the pipeline and they're getting their PhDs, but as you also heard earlier, they are dropping out of the pipeline. So this question addresses that issue. What happens to men and women after they get their PhDs? How does having babies affect them? This is a very specific look at one of the issues. We have many issues relating to women out of the pipeline, but this is a very important and central one. We used as our data, for the most part, an incredible database which has been supported largely by NSF since 1973, and it has over 160,000 PhDs in it. Every time someone gets a PhD, and when I was graduate dean, I wouldn't give them their doctorate until they entered their data for this SED survey of earned doctorates. You get some baseline data, and then they follow through about 10% every 2 years until you are 76, dead, or have left the country. So they do follow you for a long time. People who are in it, they call, they write, they won't let me alone, so they have to do it. So therefore we have probably the best longitudinal database in America, and we can ask very specific questions like, what is the timing of family formation, and others, many others, but this is the one that I'm asking for this particular presentation. And here we have our first snapshot. This is 12 years after getting a PhD. These are in the sciences, and as someone mentioned this morning, the numbers are different, but the patterns are very much the same in terms of how it breaks down 12 years after getting your PhD. Who gets tenure in science? Now, in our system, tenure is sort of the equivalent of being Class A, which I noticed the seniority issue. It means you've gone through your doctorate, you've probably gone through a postdoc, sometimes that lasts 5 years. You've gone through 6 to 7 years of being an assistant professor, so you're about 40 when you get your PhD, sometimes older. This is a problem. We're very front-ended in terms of what we demand from people, and those of you who are women in the audience, and I think there are a large number here, will recognize that the decade between 30 and 40, between the ages of 30 and 40, is when you have to get everything done. You have to make your mark in your career in science, and if you're going to have children, you probably have to have them before you're 40 as well. So there's a collision course going on for most of our women scientists, racing to get everything done and then also perhaps to have children. The wisdom used to be wait until you after you got tenure, but it's taken much longer to get tenure because our postdocs go on forever, etc. So what happens 12 years after science? Well, you can see the blue-hatted person is a man, and he has a very big head because 77% of those who enter into a four-year university as a faculty member will get tenure if they are a man, and only 23% will end up in the neck. Now, the neck is actually the most important part of the story. These are the part-time, the adjunct, the gypsy scholars of the academic world, and it's the fastest growing part of the academic world. People who don't have permanent positions and certainly don't have tenure positions, and they stay there more or less indefinitely, and increasingly it is populated by mothers, women with children. So you see at the other end you have the woman with a baby, married women with children, and she's only 53, I can't read it from here, but I think it's 53% likely to become a tenured professor and just about as likely to fall into the second tier. This is, again, the second-class citizen in most universities. Single women, on the other hand, do much better than married mothers, but they don't do as well as men. And the reason they're tiny is that the number of women is, of course, tiny compared with men, and they're far less likely to fall into the second tier. So this is a snapshot of what happens 12 years after PhD, but how do they get there? This may be the most important slide of the whole issue. This is the pipeline slide, and it's probably not terribly self-explanatory, but basically the bottom line is the greatest leak in the pipeline is family formation, and at 35% of married women do not enter a tenure track job. They probably go pretty much immediately into the second tier as a research associate or a gypsy scholar or whatever. They do not go on the tenure track. They do not become an assistant professor. On the other hand, single women are as likely as men to actually become an assistant professor. However, they're likely not to get tenure as well. So mothers actually have 2 points. They don't go into the tenure track, and they don't get tenure if they're in the tenure track. So there's a double whammy there, and you'll see more of this. But that's maybe the most important explanation of why women drop out of the track. Now, for the single mothers, obviously there are lots of other single women, there are other things going on, but the largest factor, it's not the only factor, is childbirth. And here we have, when they don't enter the tenure track, they've already probably given up as postdocs or as graduate students. And as graduate dean, and we've done a lot of studies on this as well, the graduate students had already made up their mind, particularly the women, that they weren't going to continue to become a research professor because they just couldn't see how it was done. And when they had children, they did not continue. But there weren't so many graduate students having children. The postdoc years, however, are very fertile. Those are the childbearing years, usually between the ages of 30 and 35 or 28 and 35. So lots of babies are born during the postdoc years. And as you can see for that, 41% of the women who have babies while they're postdocs do not plan on continuing as research professors. And if they came with children, 32% as to postdocs say they won't go on, as opposed to men and also single women who are half that number. So here's the major drop in science in the postdoc years. And we haven't really paid enough attention to our postdocs, who in America can either be employees or they can be trainees. They can get almost no support for family-friendly policies, or depending on the university, they might get a fair amount. Very, very arbitrary. So those are the critical years, as well as being a young assistant professor. All the way from graduate student years through getting tenure are very important childbearing and therefore vulnerable years for women. Here are some graduate students. We surveyed the whole of the UC graduate student population, which is about 10,000 actually, because that's all the campuses. And regrettably, I can't read it, but maybe you can. It's too far away. Basically, the woman says, I can't think of how I could possibly have children because it's so impossible in academia, etc. And the guy, and guys leave too, they get disaffected, said, I don't want to be a workaholic like the professors I see around me, and I can't see how you can live that life. But overall, it was a fairly extensive survey. It's the family reason that women choose even before they have children and just don't see how they can go on. Again, paying attention to our graduate students and postdocs would do a lot to help the tenure, help the leak out of the pipeline for women in science. So here's a kind of a quick summary of basically years of research. Married mothers are 35% less likely to enter tenure-track jobs than are married fathers with children. And married mothers with children are 27% less likely to achieve tenure than married fathers with children. Although being a parent is clearly not gendered, men and women are parents, I think it's fairly clear that the burden does fall harder on women. There are many things we can do to alleviate that, but it's a reality that that's the way it is, as you'll see from some other figures as well. So to ignore it entirely and not consider this a gender issue is losing a lot of people from the science pipeline. And mothers often make their decision earlier. Twice as many women than men say they're likely to change their career away from being a research professor when they have babies as a postdoc. This is just repeating what we saw before. But again, you see the pipeline, the big drop is just not going into that tenure track job and going into a second tier of part-time or adjunct or whatever. And then the second drop is at tenure. And single women also have trouble, but they're twice as successful as married women with children, and they have trouble compared with married. But married men do better than everybody else, better than single men as well. I'm not even. Do anyone have an idea why that is? I don't know really. The research doesn't tell you everything. But I had a lovely father, and he was full of wisdom, and he said, you know, marriage really straightens a guy up, and children, wow, that makes them a stick. There's a kind of a belief that men become more serious when they have children, and women become less serious. So this is part of it. It's not just the numbers of drop. Why they drop out has a lot to do with discrimination, and a lot of that is pregnancy and maternal discrimination. So it's a combination of not being able to do it in terms of the structure of the university, and it's a combination of real discrimination related to pregnancy and maternity. And again, a high percentage of mothers slide into the second tier, the part-time adjunct and lecturer corps, the gypsy scholars of the university world. Do you have gypsy scholars in Europe? Yes, okay. You know, what happens, I mean, I know many people who do this. I was actually a gypsy scholar for a while. You travel between two institutions and teach a class here and two classes there, and you finally get it together so you can pay the rent. That's basically the gypsy scholar life. Or if you're married, you get it together so it's enough to help the income, but you and then you have more time, but you trade off for a good, regular, grade A job. Now, after several years of doing this and publishing this data and getting lots of attention and a lot of action, actually, from universities, I thought, you know, we're only seeing half the question of gender equity. It's one thing to count the number of women professors in the A level. It's another thing to look at those women in the A level and see if they have the same family formation as the men do. In other words, what is the cost career of family formation? What is the effect of career on family formation. And I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but it's actually more drastic than getting into tenure. As you can see from this, married fathers are 73% of the tenured faculty in the sciences. This is, again, the national study. And married mothers are only 53% of the population of tenured faculty. So here you see a huge gap, and women are twice as likely to be single. So it's a double equity issue here, double representation, and it's rarely presented that way. Okay, so only 1 in 3 women without children who takes a fast-track university job ever become mothers. Women are far less likely to be married with children than are men, 53% to 73%. And women who achieve tenure are more than twice as likely than men who achieve tenure to be single 12 years out from a PhD. Now, I have to say, when I give this to graduate students, there's a huge taking out of the Kleenex and the handkerchief is this point. And then I keep on telling them, which you will hear, that we're doing something about it. I know it's bad, but don't give up on science. Don't give up on your academic career. Things will get better. Women faculty were more than twice as likely as men faculty indicate they wish they could have had more children. This is sort of the argument that women don't want the children, they just go into science because it's their, it's their life. I don't really think that's so true. Certainly not of the younger generation who seem to want it all, which they should have. They should have it all. Okay. Okay, then the question after this is, what are your next steps? And we have spent many years, and so has Dr. Ward here, trying to change policies at our university, the UC system. Actually, we're 10 campus systems, so what we can actually work effectively. Usually being in a 10 campus system is a nightmare, but for these things you can centrally change policy for all 10 campuses, and you can have almost an instant transformation, at least of the policies, not necessarily of the culture, but of the policies. So we did a number of things starting in 2003, and it's not just the things we've done. I'm going to present things other universities have done as well, because the good notion is there's been a huge momentum in this area, and the universities are competing with each other to have family-friendly policies, not because it's the right thing to do, it's good business. The young people are looking for those policies, and they're choosing those policies, and if they don't see them, they're going to choose someone else. And that has actually been very effective. I've heard reports from many universities that that's why they came, because they got a dual career job. I'll go into this in a minute. That both husband and wife got a job, which is really critical in our country. But I'll show you some of the things that have been done, just a small amount of them, and then I hope you will, the next time I see you, share what you're doing in this regard too on family-friendly policies. This starts on the notion that, which was portrayed before, motherhood is a whole lot more work at home than fatherhood. I don't think that's foreign to all of you. That old second shift doesn't seem to go away, and you can see that women work 49 hours in these are mothers, faculty mothers, in the second shift, which is caretaking and housework. And they also put in a full other shift, clearly, in the university, which is the gray lower part. And fathers do their share, too, but really only half as much as mothers. And then you have the single men and the single women who don't have to do that share, and their life is far less fettered. And then you'd think, well, the new generation is changing. That doesn't happen anymore. These are the old, the old faculty. They're old now. But these are the postdocs. And you can see that our postdocs have an even greater second shift. The women, which is why they probably leave, they have, I can't read the number of hours, but you can see it's plenty of hours up there for mothers as postdocs compared with fathers who also put in their shift and single people. Also, the postdocs said, not surprisingly, that they can't go to conferences because they don't have any support for children, so they don't go to conferences. They have a less good relationship with their advisor because they're not necessarily always there when they're having children, etc. So it's not a surprise that they do not continue in science. So there are a number of things that many universities have tried, and this is just a kind of a compilation, kind of a sketch of the several of them. Childcare is always a major issue at all universities, and no one can have enough of it, and those are kind of different problems. The dual career is a major issue, particularly for administrators. Nancy, is that true at your university? Yes. The hiring now has become very contingent on, can you provide a job for my trailing spouse, is the word we use. Although I think there's a new word for it, like academic spouse, but trailing spouse is the old word. And not surprisingly, women are far more likely to be the trailing spouse. The first job goes to the man. So finding a place for the couple is one of the ways in which you will keep women from dropping out of the pipeline very effectively, because they're always, all couples are very grateful. A couple of stories to tell about that at Berkeley, which I won't tell because there's not enough time, but it makes all the difference, and that is the economic advantage. You can really get almost anyone if you provide a job for their husband or wife. Well, not entirely, but it's close. And then all the things related to more time. Now, America, as you know, has a brutal system of having no paid family leave and no time off for childbirth. Brutal. Europe has done so much better in this way. We worship at your feet. It's really true. No one does it worse than America. We're the only industrialized country that provides nothing for childbirth. So that's a really important one for all universities, and various kinds of leaves. And as you will see, one of the things we're now doing is making the tenure track more flexible, having a part-time pre- and post-tenure with the right of return, so you're not going to end up in a marginalized position at the edge of the tenure world. So best practice is the dual career support, which I mentioned, and there are many ways to do that. Usually the university has to kick in, the departments have to negotiate. It's a dance, and I'm sure you're familiar with this in Europe as well, because Americans are very mobile, and they rarely stay where they got their PhD, and they'll move after they'll go someplace for a postdoc and then somewhere else for a faculty position. So they are on the road, and if they're on the road with a spouse, it's going to be the determining factor. Okay, I'm only going to do 5 minutes. It's fine. And a part-time tenure track with right of return. This has just been introduced. Did you do this at Michigan? Yes. Michigan, I think, was the first university where Nancy was at the time, and probably was very instrumental in doing this. I knew it. Again, to alleviate the problem that we were losing people from even entering the tenure track line because they thought they'd never have a baby if they did it, etc. So this means we both stop the clock for a year for moms and dads for a childbirth, and we provide part-time tenure track with the right to return so they can, at least in the UC system, elongate the number of years to getting tenure to up to 10, because usually it's 5 or 6. So even if it isn't necessarily the answer to everything, it's psychologically the answer to a lot of things. It gives people the idea that it's possible and we care, etc. And we know that the culture change is almost more important in some ways than the policies themselves. Best practices, the leaves that I mentioned, which you already have for the most part. But we also do something I'm not sure you do. We give mothers a semester off in many universities for childbirth from teaching. At Berkeley, we actually give two semesters from teaching for childbirth. You do this anyway, so I can't even tell you about this. And for fathers, we also do it. For fathers who have at least half-time care, they get a semester off, and they do get some childbirth leave, and they do get a stop the clock. So we do include fathers, and it's absolutely critical to do so, or the mothers will not take the leaves. We've found that from our research and experience. I think everybody has found that. Okay. And the child care, well, child care is very just idiosyncratic because every institution has to do their own things. I won't go over that. I'm sure you do better in Europe because you do those things much better. Now here's from a father, and these testimonies are incredible. This is just an acknowledgement in a book that he wrote, and someone pointed it out to me after it was published, and then I met him, but it was long afterward, and I can't read it. Could someone else read this for me?
To the best I can. When Ezra Max Brilliant was born in August 2008, I was able to enjoy him as much as I did during his first year without risking my career
Anyway, he gives attention. He gives it thanks to the UC Family Friendly Edge. I never knew him, never met him, but he was one of the recipients, and he was a guy, which is really important because when men start saying this is good policy, then it becomes good policy. That's how you change a culture. Okay, and as Wanda mentioned, a major issue in America, as well as here, I suppose, almost all of our scientific research is funded, or most of it, by the federal agencies, and NSF and NIH are the two major ones. And they give all the money to the grantors, the PIs, etc. And it's been a very difficult relationship because the university does the personnel and the benefits program. So the idea, and this is Wanda's idea, and it's just starting and it's great, to have a university-federal partnership of working together. And these are some of the things that we've talked about in our research, the supplements which they're doing. Reentry postdocs, because if you lose a couple of years in science, if you drop out even a year for childbirth, it's as if you were never born. And that's a very, very big loss, economic loss, as well as the loss of an incredibly finely trained woman, not to take her back after a year or two, or a man who does the same thing. So the reentry postdocs, to retrain them, again, for the fast-changing competitive market. And here are some of the initiatives the National Science Foundation is already presenting, and I think your director did mention a couple of them, and you did as well. Is there anything else you want to say about this, Wanda? Okay, and other agencies are as well. And Obama's behind it. Michelle Obama's very much behind it. I mean, it's really good to be on the back of a momentum that really is a momentum. And I want you to know that policies, well, this is changing the culture. I already mentioned I'm running out of my time. But this is my favorite. This is my grandmother baby pictures. And this is the number of babies born to University of California, Berkeley assistant professors in 2003 versus 2009. Those were the years in which we put in all these new policies. Now we have twice as many babies born to assistant professor women and about 80% more to men. So at least we're starting a real baby boom among assistant professors. And I can't tell you how good that is, because the one thing that really makes the most difference for a graduate student or postdoc is looking ahead and saying, I can do that because they did it, and this is how it works. That role model is incredibly important. And mentoring, of course, is part of the whole best practices. At any rate, we're launching this, which is basically Tools for Change. These are workshops in a box, 15-minute presentations on this and many other topics. This is part of an NSF dissemination grant to disseminate all the research and best practices that I and my co-PI, Joan Williams, who's done a lot of work in this area as well, have found and done over the years in 15-minute workshop boxes, so you can give it either in video with our own talking voices, or you can do a script and use your beautiful voice, which is always more, I think, compelling. So that will be coming soon. Everything should be, or most of these will be online in the spring, and that's where you look. So if you just today go in and sign up on your email, we will keep you abreast. We will nag you to death and send you all kinds of workshops in a box, whether you want them or not. Thank you very much.